Hello, everybody. I'm live. At least I hope so. Yeah, I'm gonna start reading in a few minutes, so don't worry, I'm gonna get to this in a few minutes. I've just gotta wait for everybody to join, so I'm gonna be on mute if you need me, and I'll be right back. I am working on homework, so just please be patient. Hello, everybody. I hope you can hear me all right now that it's freezing cold. It might sound weird because I'm freezing. Hold on. Alright, so I hope everybody is doing okay. So there is one person watching the stream. Hello? I hope someone else. I'm gonna notify my Discord mods, see if they even know. Be right back. So who is here at the moment? Got 2 likes. Nice. Better than we usually get. Oh, goodness. I am tired. It's 6:30 p.m. and I just got to read this book already. I hope everybody can hear me okay, because my mic has not been working. Okay, but anyways, it's time I get started. So we're going to be reading this thing right here. The Fourth Closet. So, if you guys know, I have not read any of these books. Not at all. I have all 3 of the books from this exact series, and I've not read even one book. But I know a little bit about the first 2, about Charlie, and the Twisted Ones, and the regular old animatronics. And this, I know, is about the fun times. At least I think so. So here's the back of it, what it says. What will happen to Charlie? It's the question that John can't seem to shake. Along with the nightmares of Charlie's seeming death and miraculous appearance, John just wants to forget the whole terrifying saga of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, but the past isn't so easily buried. Meanwhile, there is a new animatronic pizzeria opening in Hurricane, along with a new rash of kidnappings that feel all too familiar. Bound together by their childhood loss, John reluctantly teams up with Jessica, Marla, and Carlton to solve the case and find the missing children. Along the way, they'll unravel the twisted mystery of what really happened to Charlie and the hunting legacy of her father's creations. So that is just the back of the book. But anyways, let me shut up. And actually, I better not shut up, because if I do, this whole video would be silent. What I meant was, let's start reading the book. Now here's a question. Do you want it like it is now? Or do you want it like this, to where I can open the pages and read like this? Do you guys want it like that? Or do you want it at my face like this? I want to know which one would you guys prefer. Because there's 3 people, at least one, please say something, so I know what to do. Because I want to know, do you want to actually see me read all this, or do you want to just see me speaking? Please, somebody. Please. Please. Anybody? Anyone? Anyone? Seems like everybody has gone silent. Okay, I'm just gonna freak the crap out of people right now. Loud warning coming in. Loud warning. Okay. I'm just gonna keep it on my face like it is now. And I'm just gonna start reading. So yeah, I'm just gonna start. Since no one is going to say anything. So, let's begin. Chapter 1. Charlie, John clambered through the rubble toward the place where she'd been, choking on the dust of the explosion. The ruins shifted beneath his feet, and he stumbled over a block of concrete and caught himself just before falling. Scraping his hands raw as he grabbed frantically at the broken surface, he reached it, the place where she'd been. He could feel her presence beneath him. He took hold of an immense block of concrete and hefted it with all his strength. He managed to tip it from the pile and overturn it, where it fell with a thud, rattling the ground he stood on. Over his head, a steel beam creaked, wavering precariously. Charlie, John cried her name, again as he shoved another block of concrete away. Charlie, I'm coming! He was gasping for breath, moving the remains of the house with desperate, adrenaline-fueled strength, but the adrenaline was running thin. He set his jaw and pressed on. His palms slipped as he tried to lift the next block, and when he looked, he realized, dazedly, that his hands left streaks of blood wherever they touched. He wiped his palms on his jeans and tried again. This time the broken concrete moved, and he balanced it on his thighs and took it 3 steps away, then dropped it on a pile of debris. It crashed down into the rubble and shattered rock and glass beneath it, starting an avalanche of its own. And then beneath the sounds of wreckage he heard her whisper, "John." Charlie, his heart stopped beating as he whispered back to her, and again the rubble moved under his feet. This time he fell, landing on his back, knocking the wind out of him. He struggled to inhale, his lungs useless. Then haltingly he began to breathe. He sat up lightheaded and saw what the collapse had revealed. He was in the little hidden room in Charlie's childhood house. Before him was a plain, smooth metal wall. At the center was a door. It was only an outline, without hinges or a handle, but he knew what it was because Charlie had known when she stopped running in the midst of her escape and pressed her cheek against the surface, calling to someone or something inside. "John," she whispered his name again, and the sound seemed to come from everywhere at once, bouncing off the walls of the room. John got to his feet and put his hands on the door. It was cool to the touch. He pressed his cheek on it just as Charlie had, and it grew colder, like it was draining the warmth from his skin. John pulled back and rubbed the cold spot on his face, still watching the door as the shiny metal began to dull before his eyes. Its color paled, and then the door itself began to thin, its solidity vanishing until it looked like frosted glass. And John saw there was a shadow behind the glass, a figure of a person. The figure stepped closer, the door clarifying until he could almost see through it. He moved closer, mirroring the figure on the other side. It had a face, sleek and polished, its eyes like a statue's, sculpted, but unseeing. John peered through the door between them, his breath clouding the near transparent barrier. Then suddenly the eyes snapped open. The figure stood placidly before him, the eyes fixed on nothing. They were clouded and unmoving, dead. Someone laughed, a frantic, mirthless sound that echoed in the small, sealed room, and John looked wildly around for the source. The laughter rose in pitch, growing louder and louder. John covered his ears with his hands as the piercing noise became unbearable. "Charlie!" he cried again. John jerked awake, his heart racing. The laughter went on, following him out of the dream. Disorientated, his eyes darted around the room, then lit on the TV, where a clown's painted face filled the screen, caught in a convulsive fit of laughter. John sat up, rubbing his cheek where his watch had been pressing onto it. He checked the time, then breathed a sigh of relief. He had just enough time to get to work. He sat back, taking a moment to catch his breath. On the TV screen, a local news anchor was holding a mic up for a man dressed as a circus clown, complete with a painted face, a red nose, and a rainbow-colored wig. Around his neck was a collar that looked like it belonged in a Renaissance painting, and he was wearing a full yellow clown suit with red pom-poms for buttons. "So tell me," the anchor said brightly, "did you already have this costume, or did you make it especially for the grand opening?" John switched the TV off and headed for the shower. He'd been at it all day, but the noise was still unbearable, a rattling, clanging din punctuated by the shouts of intermittent, earth-shaking clatter of jackhammers. John closed his eyes, trying to blot it out. The vibrations resounded in his chest, filling him up, and amid the noise, the sound of desperate laughter suddenly rang in his ears. The figure from his dream came to him again, just out of sight, and he felt as though if he just turned his head the right way, he could see the face behind the door. "John!" John turned. Lewis was standing a foot away, giving him a puzzled stare. "I called your name 3 times," he said. John shrugged, gesturing at the chaos around them. "Hey, some of the guys are going out after this. You coming?" Lewis asked. John hesitated. Come on, it'll be good for you. All you do is work and sleep. He laughed good-naturedly and slapped John on the shoulder. Right, good for me, John smiled back, then looked at the ground as the expression faded. I just have so much going on right now. He tried to sound convincing. Right, lots going on. Just let me know if you change your mind. He clapped John on the shoulder again and headed back to the forklift. John watched him stride away. It hadn't been the first time John had turned them down, not the second time or the third, and it occurred to him that eventually they would stop trying, that there'd be a moment when they would all just give up. Maybe that would be the best. John, another voice called. Now what? It was the foreman shouting at him from the door of his standalone office, a trailer that had been brought on site for the duration of the construction and sat precariously on a dirt ledge. John trudged across the construction zone, ducking through a vinyl sheet in the trailer's doorway. Moments later, he was standing across a folding table from the foreman, the plastic wood-textured paneling barely holding to the walls surrounding him. I've got a couple guys out here telling me you're distracted. I'm just focused on my job, that's all, John said, forcing a smile and trying to prevent his frustration from leaking out. Oliver smiled unconvincingly. Focused, Oliver mimicked. John dropped the smile, startled. Oliver sighed. Look, I gave you a chance because your cousin said you're a hard worker. I overlooked the fact that you walked off your last job and never came back. You know I took a risk on you. John swallowed. Yes, sir, I know. Stop with the sir, just listen to me. Look, I do know what I'm told. I don't understand the problem. Your reactions are slow. You look like you're daydreaming out there. You're not a team player. What? This is an active construction zone. If you're in La La Land or not or you're not thinking about the safety of the other man out there, there's someone's going to get hurt or killed. I'm not saying you have to share secrets and braid one another's hair. I'm saying you have to be on the team. They have to trust that you're not going to let them down when it counts. John gave an understanding nod. This is a good job, John. I think these are good guys out there, too. Work isn't easy to come by these days, and I need you to get your head in the game, because next time I see it in the clouds, well, don't put me in that position. Understand? Yeah, I understand, John said numbly. But he didn't move, standing on the shag brown carpet that came with the portable office as though waiting to be dismissed from detention. Okay, get out, John went. The dressing down had taken up the last few minutes of his workday. He helped Sergey put away some of the equipment and then headed to his car with a muttered goodbye. Hey, Sergey called after him. John stopped. Last call. John broke off, spotting Oliver out of the corner of his eye. Maybe next time, he said. Sergey pressed. Come on, it's my excuse to avoid that new kid's place. My daughter's been begging to go there all week. Lucy's taking her, but robots creep me out. John paused, and the world grew silent around him. What place? John said. So you coming? Sergey asked again. John took a few steps backward as if he'd come too close to a ledge. Maybe another time, John said, and walked decidedly to his car. It was old and brownish red, something that might have been cool in high school. Now it was just a reminder that he was still a kid who hadn't moved on, a mark of status that had become the mark of shame within the space of a year. He sat heavily, a plume of dust shooting out the sides of the car seat as he dropped onto it. His hands were shaking. Get a grip. He closed his eyes and clutched the wheel, steadying himself. This is life now, and you can do it, he whispered, then opened his eyes and sighed. Sounds like something lame my dad would have said. He turned the key. The drive home should have been 10 minutes, but the route he took was closer to half an hour. As it avoided driving through town, if he didn't drive through town, there was no risk of running into people he didn't want to talk to, More importantly, he didn't risk running into the people he did not want to talk. He did want to talk to. Be a team player. He couldn't muster real resentment toward Oliver. John wasn't a team player, not anymore. For almost 6 months, he had been coming and going from home to work like a train on a track, stopping to buy food now and then, but not much else. He spoke only when necessary, avoided eye contact. He was startled when people spoke to him, whether they were coworkers saying hello or strangers asking the time. He made conversation, but he was getting better at speaking while walking away. He was always polite, while also making it clear he had somewhere to be made obvious, when necessary, by suddenly turning in the opposite direction. Sometimes he felt like he was fading away, and it was jarring and disappointing to be reminded that he could still be seen. He pulled into the lot of his apartment complex, a two-story building not really meant for long-term tenants. There was a light in the window of the manager's office. He had tried for a month to track the open hours, then given up, concluding that there was no pattern. He grabbed an envelope from the glove compartment and headed toward the door. He knocked, and there was no response, though inside he could hear sounds of movement. He knocked again, and this time the door opened partially. An old woman with the skin of a lifelong smoker peered out at him. "Hey, Delia," John smiled. She didn't smile back. "Rent check." John handed an envelope to her. "I know it's late. I came by yesterday, but no one was here." "Was it during business hours?" Delia peered into the envelope carefully, as though suspicious of what might be inside. "The lights were off, so then it wasn't during the business hours." Delia bared her teeth, but it wasn't really a smile. "I saw you hung up a plant," she said abruptly. "Oh, yeah." John peered over his shoulder toward his apartment, as though he might be able to see it from where they stood. "It's nice to take care of something, right?" John tried to smile again, but quickly gave up, engulfed in a vacuum of judgment that allowed for no levity. "That's allowed, right? To have a plant?" "Yes, you can have a plant." Delia took a step back inside and looked poised to close the door. "People don't usually settle in here, that's all. Usually there is a house, then a wife, and then the plant." "Right." John looked down at his shoes. "It's just been a rough," he began, but the door closed with a firm thunk. "Year." John considered the door for a minute, then headed to the ground floor apartment at the front of the complex. Now, now his for another month. It was a single bedroom unit with a full bath and half a kitchen. He kept the blinds up while he was away to show that he had nothing. The area was prone to burglaries, and it seemed like a safe bet to telegraph the fact that there was nothing to steal here. Once inside, John locked the door behind him and carefully slid the chain into place. His apartment was cool and dark and quiet. He sighed and rubbed his temples. The headache was still there, but he was growing accustomed to that. The place was sparsely furnished. It had come that way, and the only personal touch he had been added to the living room was to stack 4 cardboard boxes full of books against the wall below the window. He glanced at them with a disappointed familiarity. He went to the bedroom and sat down on his bed, the springs creaking stiffly beneath him. He didn't bother turning on the light. There was enough daylight still leaking through the small, dingy window above his bed. John looked toward his dresser, where a familiar face looked back at him. A toy rabbit's head, its body nowhere to be found. "What did you do today?" John said, meeting the plush rabbit's eyes as if it might show a spark of recognition. Theodore just stared back blankly, his eyes dark and lifeless. "You look terrible, worse than me." John stood and approached the rabbit's head. He couldn't ignore the smell of mothballs and dirty fabric. John's smile faded, and he grabbed the head by the ears and held it in the air. "Time to throw you away." He considered it almost every day. He clenched his jaw and then set it back on the dresser carefully and turned away, not wanting to look at it further. He closed his eyes, not expecting sleep to come, but hoping he hadn't slept well that night before, or the night before that. He had come to dread sleep. He put it off as long as he could, walking miles of road until late at night, returning home and trying to read, or just staring at the wall. The familiarity was frustrating. He grabbed his pillow and went back into the living room. He lay down on the couch, swinging his legs over the arm so he could fit. The silence in the little apartment was beginning to ring in his ears, and he grabbed the remote off the floor and turned on the TV. The screen was black and white, and the reception was terrible. He could scarcely make out the faces through the static, but the chatter of what sounded like a talk show was rapid and cheerful. He turned the volume low and settled back, staring at the ceiling, and half listened to the television voices until slowly he drifted into sleep. Her arm was limp, the only part of her he could see dangling from the twisted metal suit. Blood ran in red rivers down her skin, pulling on the ground. Charlie was all alone. He could hear her voice again if he tried. "Don't let go, John!" She called my name. And then that thing, he shuddered, hearing again the sound of the animatronic suit snapping and crunching. He stared at Charlie's lifeless arm as if the world around them had disappeared. And as the noise echoed in his head, his mind conjured up thoughts. Unbidden, the crunching sounds were her bones. The tearing was everything else. John opened his eyes with a start. A few feet away, a studio audience laughed, and he looked at the TV, its static and chatter bringing him back to waking life. John sat up, rolling his neck to work out kinks. The couch was too small, and his back was cramped. His head ached, and he was exhausted but restless. The shot of adrenaline still working its way through his system. He went out, locking the door forcefully behind him, and breathed in the night air. He started down the road, heading toward town and whatever might still be open. The lights on the road were far apart, and there was no sidewalk, just a shallow dirt shoulder. Few cars passed him, but when they did, they loomed up from around corners or cresting hills, blinding him with headlights and rushing by with a force that sometimes threatened to knock him back. He had begun to notice himself edging ever closer to the road as he walked, playing a half-hearted game of chicken. When he found himself too far out, he would always take a deliberate steps back to the shoulder, and it was always with a secret, sinking disappointment in himself that he would do so. As he approached town, the lights pierced the darkness once again, and he shielded his eyes and took a step back from the road. This one slowed as it passed, then came to a sudden stop. John turned and walked a few steps forward as the driver's window rolled down. "John?" someone called. The car went into reverse and haphazardly pulled onto the shoulder. John jumped out of its path. A woman stepped out and took a few quick steps toward him, as if she might try to hug him, but he stayed planted where he was, his arms stiff as his sides, and she stopped a few feet away. "John, it's me," Jessica said with a smile that quickly faded. "What are you doing out here?" she asked. She was wearing short sleeves, and she rubbed her arms against the night air, glancing back and forth along the near deserted road. "Well, I could ask you the same thing," he answered as though she had accused him of something. Jessica pointed over John's shoulder. "Gas," she smiled brightly at him, and he couldn't help but mirror her a little. He had almost forgotten the ability of hers to turn on chill goodwill like a faucet, splashing it all over everyone. "How have you been?" she asked cautiously. "Fine. Working mostly." He gestured down at the dusty work clothes he hadn't bothered to change out of. "What's new with you?" he asked, suddenly aware with the absurdity of the conversation as cars passed nearby. "I really have to be going. Have a good night." He turned and began to walk away without giving her a chance to speak. "I miss seeing you around," Jessica called, "and so does she." John paused, digging at the dirt with one foot. Listen, Jessica took a few quick steps to catch up to him. Carlton's going to be in town for a couple of weeks. It's spring break. We're all getting together. She waited expectantly, but he didn't respond. He's dying to show off his new cosmopolitan persona, Jessica added brightly. When I talked to him on the phone last week, he was faking a Brooklyn accent to see if I'd notice. She forced a giggle. John smiled fleetingly. Who else is going to be there? He asked, looking directly at her for the first time since he got out of the car. Jessica's eyes narrowed. John, you have to talk to her sometime. Why is that? He said raucously, and started walking again. John, wait! Behind him, John heard her break into a run. She caught up quickly, showing the jog beside him, matching his pace. I can do this all day, she warned, but John didn't answer. You have to talk to her, Jessica repeated. He gave her a sharp look. Charlie's dead, he said harshly, the words rasping in his throat. It had been a long time since he spoke the words aloud. Jessica stopped in her tracks. He kept going. John, at least talk to me. He didn't answer. You're hurting her, she added. He stopped walking. Don't you understand what you're doing to her after what she went through? It's insane, John. I don't know what that did to you, but I know what it did to Charlie. And you know what? I don't think anything hurt as badly as having you refuse to speak to her, to say she's dead. I saw her die. John stared out into the city lights. No, you didn't, Jessica said, then hesitated. Look, I'm worried about you. I'm just lost. John turned to her. And after what I've been through, after what we've been through, that's not an unreasonable reaction. He waited a moment for her to respond, then looked away. Hello, Dante. I get it, I really do. I thought she was dead too. John opened his mouth to speak, but she pressed on. I thought she was dead until she turned up alive. Jessica pulled at John's shoulder until he met her eyes again. I've seen her, Jessica said with her voice breaking. I've talked to her. It is her. And this. She let go of his shoulder and waved her hand over him as though casting a spell. This thing that you're doing, that's what's killing her. It's not her, John whispered. Okay, Jessica snapped, and turned on her heel. She walked back to the car after a few moments, pulled back out into the road, and then made a screeching U-turn. John stayed where he was. Jessica roared past him, then stopped abruptly, her brakes squealing, then backed up to where he stood. We're meeting at Clay's house on Saturday, she said tiredly. Please. He looked at her. She wasn't crying, but her eyes were shiny, her face red. He nodded. Maybe. Good enough for me. I'll see you there, Jessica said. Then she drove off without another word, the engine roaring in the quiet of the night. I said maybe, John muttered into the darkness. Oh my goodness. That was one chapter. Okay, little break time for everybody. Even I'm tired. Holy crap. So far, John has had a dream of Charlie's death. No, not a dream. He was thinking of it. Thinking of when Charlie died in the suit and had that dream of digging Charlie out of the rubble. So the book is starting off on a cliffhanger, of course. I don't half understand anything, because I don't even remember Charlie being in a suit, or that she even died, because I have not read the other books. Oh, goodness. I hope you guys know. We're on page 17, which is chapter 2. Same. I'm on page 17. That's where we're on right now, guys. And where we need to go is to page 348. You know what? How about this? Instead of reading this entire book, I will do half the book for this video, and probably tomorrow I'm gonna read the rest of it. That's too much. Yeah, it is. 348. Let's go to one. Let's go from 17 to 156, which is half the book. We are right here. And 156 is where we want to be. Because that's at least where I want to get to for today. So let me throw another Yu-Gi-Oh card in here so I don't lose the spot. So we have to read up. See that? I have two cards. This one right here and this one right here. This is where we need to be. Because this is half the book. So you guys ready to read some more? So we have a ton. Alright. Eternal Valkyrie. I hope you're ready, and whoever the other person is, I hope you're ready too, because I'm about to start again. This is tiring. My rear end hurts when you're sitting on a wooden chair reading. It's not comfortable. You know what? I'm going to lean like this. Tilt it like this, so now you guys can actually see the book now while I'm reading. Alright, page 156 is where we're going. We're starting 17, starting now. Chapter 2. The pencil squeaked against the paper as the man at the desk carefully filled out the form in front of him. He paused suddenly, a wave of dizziness overtaking him. The letters on the page were fuzzy, and he adjusted his reading glasses. His head swimming, the glasses made no difference, and he took them off and rubbed his eyes. Then, just as suddenly as it had come, the sensation was gone. The room righted itself, and the words on the page were perfectly clear. He scratched his beard, still disconcerted, then began to steadily write again. A ring sounded, and the front door opened. "Yes, sir?" he barked without looking up. "I wanted to have a look around the yard," a woman's voice echoed softly. "Oh, pardon me, ma'am." The man looked up and smiled momentarily, then went back to his form, writing as he talked. "Scrap is 50 cents a pound. It might be worth more if you find a specific pot, but we can see when you come back in. Just go have a look around. You have to bring your own tools, but we can help you load it up when you're ready to leave. I'm looking for something specific." The woman peered down at him, observing his name tag. "Bob," she added belatedly. "Well, I don't know what to tell you," he said with his his pencil down, then reclined and crossed his arms behind his head. "It's a dump," he laughed. "We tried to at least separate the junk cars from the tin cans, but what you see is what you get. Bob, you received several truckloads of scrap metal on this date, and from this location." The woman set a piece of paper down on top of the form Bob had been working on. Bob picked it up and adjusted his reading glasses, and looked up at her over them. "Well, as I said, it's a dump," he said slowly, growing more concerned as the moments passed. "I might be able to point you in the right direction. I mean, we don't catalog the stuff." The one walked around the side of the desk, stepping up beside Bob's chair, and he straightened nervously in his seat. "I hear you boys had some trouble here last night," she said casually. "No trouble." Bob furrowed his brow. "Some kids snuck in. It happens." "That's not what I heard." The woman studied a picture on the wall. "Your daughters?" she asked lightly. "Yes, 2 and 5. They're beautiful." She paused. "Do you treat them well?" Bob was taken aback. "Of course I do," he said, trying to hide his indignation. There was a long pause. The woman tilted her head, she still looking at the picture. "I heard you called the police because you thought someone was trapped in the scrap heaps out there," she said. Bob didn't answer. "I heard," the woman continued, leaning in closer to the picture, "that you thought you heard screaming and sounds of distress and panic. Something was trapped. A child was trapped, you thought. Maybe several. Look, we run a clean business and we have a good reputation. I'm not disputting your reputation. Quite the opposite. I think what you did was honorable. Running to the rescue in the middle of the night, cutting your legs on jagged scraps of metal as you ran blindly through the yard. How do you... Bob's voice trembled, and he stopped talking. He moved his legs under the desk, hoping to hide the bandages that bulged out visibly under both pant legs. What'd you find? The woman asked. He didn't answer. What was there? She pressed. When you got on your hands and knees and crawled through the beams and the wire, what was there? Nothing, he whispered. Nothing was there. And the police? They found nothing? No, nothing. There wasn't anything. I went out again today just to be... He spread his hands on the desk in front of him, collecting his nerves. We run a good business, he said firmly. I don't feel comfortable talking about this. If I'm in some kind of trouble, then I think... You're not in any trouble, Bob, as long as you can do me one little favor. What's that? Simple. The woman leaned over Bob, bracing herself on the arms of his chair, so close her face almost touched his. Take me there. John pulled into the parking lot at the construction site and immediately saw Oliver standing in front of the gate of the chain-linked fence. His arms were crossed, and he was chewing on something, his face grim. When it became clear that he wasn't going to move out of the way, John slowed to a stop and got out. What's going on? He asked. Oliver continued to chew on whatever was in his mouth. I have to let you go, he said at last. You're late, again. I'm not late, John protested, then glanced at his watch. I mean, not by much, he amended. Come on, Oliver. It won't happen again. I'm sorry. Me too, Oliver said. Good luck, John. Oliver! John called. Oliver let himself in through the gate and glanced back one more time before walking away. John leaned against his car for a moment. Several co-workers were staring at him. Suddenly, turning away as John noticed them, John got in his car and headed back to the way he had come. When he returned to his apartment, John sat down on the edge of his bed and buried his face in his hands. Now what? He wondered aloud, and glanced around the room, his eyes lit on his only decoration. You still look terrible, he said to Theodore's disembodied head, and you're still in worse shape than me. The notion of attending the party that night suddenly returned to him. The thought of it set off a nervous fluttering in his stomach, but he wasn't sure what it was, anxiety or excitement. I thought she was dead too, Jessica had said the night before. I've seen her. I've talked to her. It is her. John closed his eyes. What if it is her? He saw it again, the moment he always saw. The shuddering suit, Charlie trapped inside it, crunched and jerked. And then her hand and the blood. She couldn't have survived that. But another image came to mind, unbidden. Dave, who became Springtrap. He had survived what happened to Charlie. Oh, survived. Okay. He had worn the yellow suit, rabbit-like suit like it was a second skin, and had paid for it twice. The scars that covered his torso like a shirt of gruesome lace told the story of one narrow escape and the second. Charlie had killed him when she tripped the spring locks, or so they all believed. No one could have survived what they saw, and yet he had returned for an instant. John pictured Charlie, scarred and broken, yet miraculously alive. But that doesn't sound like the person Jessica saw. John spoke clearly to Theodore. Someone broken and scarred? That's not who Jessica was describing. He shook his head. That's not the person I saw at the diner. The next day, she looked like she'd stepped out of a fairy tale. John caught himself and shook his head, trying to focus on the present. He really didn't know what had happened to Charlie. He felt himself edging toward the glimmer of hope. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe she's all right. It was what he'd wished for, what anyone wishes for in the throes of grief. Let it not have happened. Let everything be all right. The precarious ledge became solid ground, and John felt a weight lifted, his neck and shoulders relaxing from a cramped position he had not been aware of. The fatigue from so many months of misspent sleep caught up to him all at once. Goodness. He looked at Theodore. He was clutching the rabbit's head so tightly that his knuckles had gone white. He slowly released the toy, propping it up on the pillow. "I'm not going," he said. "I was never really considering it. I just wanted Jessica to leave me alone." He held his breath for a moment and let out a deep sigh. "Right," he said, his tone becoming more agitated. "What would I even say to these people?" Theodore started him. John sighed. "I'm not saying that." Here, if you guys want to see it for yourself. "I'm not saying it." Nope. So whenever that's in this book, I'm just gonna go like the Roblox oof sound or the Monster Inc. thing. And hey, that was actually a good stopping point. So anyways, let me continue on page 23 if anyone is reading along. The fluttering in John's stomach grew worse the closer he came to Clay's house. He checked the dashboard clock. It was only 6. Maybe no one will be there yet, he thought. But as he made his way down the winding road toward their house, cars lined both sides of the street for half a block. John wedged his car between a pickup truck and a rusted sedan, almost as beat up as his own, then got out and headed toward the house. All the windows of the 3-story house were illuminated, standing out against the trees like a beacon. John hung back, staying out of the light. He could hear music from inside and laughter. The sound of it made him balk. He forced himself to walk the rest of the way to the door, but he stopped again when he reached it. Going inside felt like an enormous decision, something that would change everything. Then again, so did walking away. How long do we have? Okay. Oh. I'm gonna have to read a lot of pages. I'm sorry, guys, that I stopped there on page 24. I was going to see how many pages we have left. We have 12. That's a pretty good long amount of pages to reach chapter 3. He raised his hand to ring the bell, then hesitated. Before he could decide, the door swung open in front of him. John blinked at the sudden light and found himself face to face with Clay Burke, who looked as startled as he was. "John!" Clay reached out and gripped John with both arms, pulled him in and gave him a hug, then quickly pushed him back to where he started and firmly patted his shoulders. "Right, come in." Clay stepped back to clear the way, and John followed him in. Looking around the room cautiously, the last time he was here, the whole house had been a wreck, strewn with signs of a man falling to pieces. Now, the piles of laundry and evidence files were gone. The couches and the floor were clean, and Clay himself was beaming with a genuine smile. He caught John's eye, and his grin faded. "A lot has changed," he smiled as though reading John's mind. "Is Betty—" John broke off too late. He shook his head. "Sorry, I didn't mean to." "No, she's still gone," Clay said evenly. "I wish she'd come back. Maybe she will someday, but life goes on," he added, with a brief smile. John nodded, uncertain what to say. "John," Marla waved from the stairs, and immediately came bounding down with her usual eagerness, wrapping him in a hug before he could so much as say hello. Jessica appeared, coming in from the kitchen. "Hey, John," Jessica said more calmly, but with a glowing smile. "I'm so glad to see you again. It's been a long time," Marla said, releasing him at last. "Yeah," he said, "too long." He tried to think of something else to say, and Marla and Jessica exchanged a glance. Jessica opened her mouth about to speak, but was interrupted as Carlton ran excitedly down the staircase. "Carlton!" John called with his first genuine smile of the evening. Carlton raised his hand in an answering wave and came to join the group. "Hey," he said. "Hey," John echoed as Carlton tousled John's hair. "What are you, my granddad now?" John made a half-hearted effort to straighten his hair while searching the crowd with his eyes. "I'm surprised you came," Marla slapped him across the shoulder. "I mean, of course you're going to come," Carlton corrected. I just know you've been busy. Too many girlfriends, am I right?" "How's New York?" John asked. fishing out for something to talk about as he straightened his clothes. Great! College city, learning, friends. I was in a play about a horse. It's great. He bobbed his head in a rapid nod. Marla's in school, too. In Ohio, Marla jumped in. I'm primed. That's great, John grinned. Yeah, it's been a lot of hard work, but it's worth it, she said cheerfully. And John began to relax, falling back into the familiar pattern of their friendships. Marla was still Marla. Carlton was still inscrutable. Is Lamar around? Carlton asked. Looking from face to face, Marla shook her head. I called him a few months ago, she said. He's on track to graduate early. But he's not coming? Carlton persisted. Marla smiled slightly. He said, I'm never, ever, ever setting foot in that town again. Not ever. Never for as long as I live. And you shouldn't either. But he said we're all welcome to visit him. In New Jersey? Carlton made a skeptical face, then turned his attention to Jessica. Jessica, what's up with you these days, anyway? I heard you've got the dorm room to yourself now. John stiffened, suddenly aware of what Carlton was really asking. The lights seemed blinding. The noise louder. Jessica glanced at John, but he didn't acknowledge her. Yeah, she said, turning back to the others. I don't know what happened, but I came home one day right after, about 6 months ago, and she was packing what she could carry. She left me and John to clean up the rest. If we hadn't happened to walk in, I don't think she was even going to tell me she was leaving. Didn't she say where she was going? Marla asked. Ouch. Her brow furrowing. Jessica shook her head. She hugged me and said she'd miss me. But all she'd say was she had to leave. She wouldn't tell me where. Well, we can always ask her, Carlton said. John looked at him startled. You've seen her? Carlton shook his head. Not yet. My plane just got in today. She'll be here tonight. Jessica says she looks good. Right, John said. They all looked at him as if they could see what he was thinking. She looks good, but she doesn't look like Charlie. John, come help me in the kitchen, Clay called, and John broke away from the group, relieved, but also fully aware he couldn't possibly provide any help in the kitchen. What's up? He asked. Clay leaned back against the sink and looked him up and down. Need me to open the ketchup bottle? John asked, growing nervous. High shelf? Clay sighed. I just want to make sure you're all right out there. What do you mean? I thought you might be nervous. I know it's been a while since you and Charlie talked. It's been a while since you and I have talked too, John said, unable to keep the edge out of his voice. Well, that's different, you know it, Clay said drily. I thought you might need a pep talk. A pep talk? John retorted. Clay shrugged. Well, do you? Clay stared at him firmly, but with kindness in his eyes, and John's nerves calmed. Jessica told you? He asked, and Clay tilted his head to the side. Some, probably not all, here. Clay opened the refrigerator door he had been leaning against and handed John a soda. Try to relax. You're here with friends. Those people out there love you. Clay smiled. I know, John said, setting the can on the countertop next to him. He eyed it for a second but did not pick it up, feeling like if he drank it, he would be given in, accepting everything he was told. It would be like taking whatever pill everyone else had already swallowed. John eyed the back door. Don't even think about it, Clay said abruptly. John didn't try to pretend it wasn't what he was thinking. Clay sighed. I know how hard this must be for you. Do you? John responded sharply, but Clay's expression didn't change. Stay and talk to her. I think you owe that to her and to yourself. John's eyes were still fixed on the door. All of his heartache that you're putting yourself through, that can't be what you want. Talk like you stepped on a leg. Clay leaned to the side, interrupting John's gaze. Stop, We're stopping. Hey, the man. Talk like you stepped on a Lego. Why? I'm not going to. Hello. I'm not going to. So I'm just gonna keep reading. We're on page 29 if you wanted to know. Yeah, 29, everybody. It's more entertaining though. Oh goodness. Get up. Oh my arm. I need to stretch for a minute, guys, because when you're leaning against the table, sitting in a wooden chair with a blanket wrapped around you because you're freezing cold, it's not comfortable. It's not comfortable at all. Oh goodness. Ow. Bones popping everywhere. We still have a lot to go. So I better just keep reading. Page 29, if anybody wants to know. You're right, John said. He stood up straight and met Clay's eyes. This isn't what I want. He went to the back door and pushed it open, rushing down the concrete steps as though... Excuse me. I'm gonna be here for the long road. Okay. Well, just keep walking with me, because it's gonna be a while. Steps as though Clay might pursue him. Then walking around the side of the house toward his car. His heart pounding. He felt a little lightheaded and completely unsure he was making the right decision. John, someone called from behind him. The familiar voice sent a jolt through him, and he stopped, closing his eyes for a second. He heard her heels tapping on the stone walk, the sound vanishing as she crossed the grass to him. He opened his eyes and turned toward the voice. She was standing a few feet from him. Thanks for stopping, Charlie said. Her face was anxious, her arms wrapped tightly across her body like she was cold, despite the mild weather. I was just going to get my jacket, John said, trying to sound casual in the midst of an obvious lie. He looked her up and down, and she didn't move, like she knew what he was doing and why. It's not her. She looked like some stunning cousin of Charlie's, maybe, but not her. Not the round-faced, frizzy-haired, awkward girl he had known almost all his life. She was taller, thinner, her hair longer, darker. Her face was uncannily different, though he could not have explained how. Her posture, even as she stood hugging herself in anxiety, was somehow elegant. As he looked at her, the first shock of recognition gave way to an acute revulsion. He took an involuntarily step back. How can anyone think that's her, he thought. How can anyone think that's my Charlie? She bit her lip. John, say something, she said, pleading in her voice. He shrugged, holding both hands up in resignation. I don't know what to say, he admitted. She nodded. She uncrossed her arms as if she had really realized she was holding them that way, and began to pick at her nails instead. I'm so happy to see you, she said, sounding like she was about to cry. John softened, but tampered the feeling down. Me too, he said in a monotone. I missed you, she began, searching his face for something. John had no idea what he might look like, but he felt like stone. I I had to get away for a while, she went on uncertainly. That night, John, I thought I was going to die. I thought you did, he said, trying to swallow the lump rising in his throat. She hesitated. You don't think I'm me? She asked softly at last. She looked down at his feet for a moment, unable to say the words to her face. Jessica told me. It's okay, John, she said. I just want you to know that it's okay. Her eyes were bright with tears. His heart lurched, and in an instant the word came into a different focus. He gazed at the woman huddled in front of him, trying to suppress her sobs. The stark differences he saw in her were suddenly things that seemed so easily explained. Her shoes had heels, so she was taller. She was wearing a form-fitting dress instead of her usual jeans and a t-shirt, so she appeared thinner. She was wearing elegant clothing, and her gestures were confident, sophisticated. But it was all no more than if Jessica had given her the makeover she was always threatening. No more than if Charlie had just grown up. We've all had to grow up. John thought of the way he drove home from work, or had until this morning. The way he avoided ever driving past her house, or the sight of Freddy Fazbear's. Maybe Charlie had things she wanted to avoid. Maybe she just wanted to be different. Maybe she wanted to change like you did. When you think of that moment, what it did to you, what must it have done to her? What kind of nightmares do you have, Charlie? He was seized by a sudden visceral desire to ask her, and for the first time he allowed himself to meet her eyes. His stomach jolted as he did, his heart racing. Tentatively, she smiled at him, and he smiled back, unconsciously mirroring her, but something frigid twitched inside him. Those aren't her eyes. John shifted his gaze, a calm coming over him. Charlie looked momentarily confused. Charlie, John said carefully, do you remember the last thing I said to you before you were trapped in the suit? She held his gaze for a moment, then she shook her head. I'm sorry, John, she said. I don't remember a lot about that night. Whole pieces are just missing. I remember being in the suit. I passed out, I think, for hours. So you don't remember, he repeated gravely. It seemed impossible that she could have forgotten. Maybe she didn't hear me. Were you hurt? He asked brusquely. She nodded silently, her eyes filling again with tears, and she hugged herself. This time she didn't look cold. She looked like she was in pain. Maybe she was. John took a step closer to her, wanting suddenly, desperately, to promise her that everything would be all right. But then her eyes met his again, and he stopped, stepped back. She extended a hand, but he didn't take it, and again she crossed her arms over her body. John, would you meet me tomorrow? She asked steadily. Why? He said, before he could stop himself, but she did not react. I just want to talk. Give me a chance. Her voice rose shakily, and he nodded. Sure, yeah, I'll meet you tomorrow, he paused. That same place, okay? He added carefully, wanting to see how she would reply. The Italian place? Our first date? She said easily and gave a gentle smile. Her tears seemed to have stopped. Around 6? John let out a deep breath. Yeah. She met her gaze again and did not look away, letting himself take rest in her eyes for the first time that night. She looked back at him, motionless, like she was afraid she might scare him away. John nodded, then turned and left without another word. He walked quickly back to his car, struggling to keep his pace even. He felt like he had done something wonderful, and also like he had made a horrible mistake. He felt strange, riding an adrenaline rush, and as he drove through the dark, he pictured her face again. Those weren't her eyes. Charlie watched him go, rooted to the spot as if it were the only place she'd ever stood. He doesn't believe me. Jessica had not wanted to tell her about John's strange yet adamant conviction, but his refusal to speak to her now, his unwillingness even to acknowledge her presence that day in the diner, was too bizarre to be dismissed. How can he think I'm not me? The taillights of John's car vanished around a bend. Charlie stared into the dark where he had been, not wanting to return to the bright, noisy house. Carlton would tell her a joke. Jessica and Marla would comfort her the way they had in the diner that day. We had come to show them that somehow, impossibly, that she survived. Pause. I've checked out some of your recent videos. I've never got a chance to watch them, and no comments with. What the heck? You're so underrated that it's crazy how 60 people watch those battles but have nothing to say. Okay, yeah, it's a little bit weird. I know. I don't understand it either, the man. Okay, I want to continue. Page 34, guys. The man is just probably here to just tell everybody the pages. The walk from her car, really, Aunt Jen's borrowed car, toward the diner had felt like miles that day, her stomach fluttering anxiously, even though she knew, of course, that they would be happy to see her. How could they not be? Every step was stiff, uncertain. Every time she moved, it hurt. Her body sore all over from the day before. though there were no marks on her to show it. COVID. Even breathing was strained and unfamiliar, and she had a persistent feeling that if she forgot to do it, she would stop. I don't even know how to say this. Asphyxiation? Can you guys even see that? Everything's backwards. I can't find it. It's a long word. I don't know how to say it. Sorry. Right there on the pavement, unless she was reminded. Take a breath. She could see them through the window as she made her way to the front of the diner, her heart racing, and then they saw her, and it was everything she had dared to hope. Marla and Jessica ran to the door, jostling over who would hug her first, crying at the sight of her living face. She let herself be wrapped in the warmth of their relief, but before they even let her go, she was looking for John. My voice is very straining right now. I'm pausing for a second. Jesus. My voice hurts. I have not talked for over an hour straight. That's a new record for me. There's nothing even in it. Whoa, take it easy. I'm still going. I've talked for over an hour. I gotta keep going. Say Epic Gamer Juice. Epic Gamer Juice. There's nothing even in it. You know what? I'll be right back. I'm gonna actually get something to drink. Hold on. And none of you can even hear me. Ha! I was talking to myself the whole time. I've got the drink now. As you guys can see, I've now got drink. And that legend has reached 1,290 subscribers. You know what? If we ever reach 1,000, I might actually give away a Dullahan. Like a full custom 3D printed or Decimate Arn Galler, which you guys haven't seen yet. But, yeah, I might actually. It just matters if we get to 1,000 subscribers. I might actually do it. I'm thinking about it. But so far, we're still not there yet. We need about 140. But anyways, page 34 at the very bottom, last sentence is where we are. When she saw him, his back to the door, she almost called out his name, but something stopped her. He said something she could not hear, and she watched incredulous as he failed to come to her, clenching a spoon in his hand like a weapon. John, she called at last, but he did not turn around. Marla and Jessica ushered her out of the restaurant, making reassuring sounds that must have been words, and Charlie strained to see him through the window. He had not moved. How can he pretend I'm not here? A shock of pain hit her suddenly, yanking her back to the present, and Charlie hugged herself tightly, though it didn't really help. It was everywhere, sharp and hot. FNAF Security Breach is going to be probably the best FNAF game out, not counting the first one. She clenched her jaw, unwilling to make a sound. Sometimes it eased to an ache she could push to the back of her awareness. Sometimes it vanished for days at a time, but always it came back. Were you hurt? John had asked. The first, the only sign he had given that he might still care, and she had been unable to reply. Yes, she could have said, yes, I was, and I still am. Sometimes I think I'll die of it, and what I feel now is just an echo of what it used to be. It feels like all my bones are broken. It feels like my guts are twisted and torn. It feels like my head is cracked open, and things are leaking out. And it happens again and again. She clenched her teeth, taking deliberate breaths until it began slowly to recede. Charlie, are you okay? Jessica said quietly, appearing beside her on the sidewalk outside Clay's house. Charlie nodded. I didn't hear you come over, she said hoarsely. He doesn't mean to hurt you, he's just traumatized, Charlie snapped. I know, Jessica sighed. And Charlie shook her head. Sorry, I didn't mean to be rude. That sounds like sleeping on the wrong side of the bed after a nice marathon of anime. Good lord. I know, Jessica said. Charlie sighed, closing her eyes. He's not the one who died. And it did feel like dying. She could only remember that crucial night in fragments. Her thoughts were all scraps and whispers, hazy and muddled, everything circling slowly around a central point. The single, unmistakable snapping around, excuse me, of the spring locks. Charlie shivered and felt Jessica's hand touched her shoulder. She opened her eyes, looking helplessly at her friend. I think he just needs time, Jessica said gently. How much time can he need? Charlie asked, and the words sounded like stone. That's the end of chapter 2. We're now on chapter 3. Gonna take a little break this time. Oh. Okay, chapter 3 I'm gonna speak in Australian, like in my Australian accent, so I hope you all like the this voice, because I'm gonna do this for a whole, let's see, page 37 to what page? Oh my gosh. My voice is not gonna be okay. Page 37 to 54, which is, oh my word. What is that? That was a good anime though. I don't even know what you're talking about. I've never heard of Promised Neverland. I've never heard of that. 37 to 54. That is for 17 pages. We're going to have fun. We're going to have fun because now I'm going to be talking in my Australian accent and reading this whole chapter 3 of page 37 to 54. So here we go. It's ready, a soft voice rang out in the dark. I'll tell you when it's ready, said the man slumped in the corner. Studying a monitor intently, raised it a few more degrees, he whispered. You've said it before that might be too much, she said from the opposite corner. Leaning over a table, the light shimmered off her contours as she carefully examined what lay before her. Do it, the slumped man said. The woman touched the dial and then recoiled suddenly. Time I'd spend time reading books in the library for AR points. Oh, kindergarten. No, not kindergarten. Hawkins Elementary. That was some. I remember that. What is it? He demanded. He didn't take his eyes off the monitor. Raised it 2 more degrees, he ordered, his voice rising. For a moment the room was silent. Finally the man turned toward the table. Is there a problem? I think it's... The woman trailed off. What? Moving, she finished. Of course it is. Of course they are. It looks like it's in pain, she whispered. The man smiled. Yes. A bright light flashed on abruptly as a sudden noise responded from the center of the room. Red, green, and blue lights flashed in sequence, and a cheerful voice erupted from the speakers embedded in the walls. filling the room with song. Every light shone down on him, the sleek white and purple bear. His joints clicked with every pivot. His eyes jolted back and forth randomly. He stood about 6 feet high, his rosy cheeks like 2 balls of bright cotton candy, and he wielded a microphone with a head like a shimmering disco ball. "Shut that thing off!" the slouched man shouted, getting to his feet with obvious difficulty. He moved slowly toward the center of the room, leaning heavily on his crane. "Get back and I'll do it myself," he screamed as the woman retreated to the table in the corner. The man pried a white plastic plate off the chest of the singing bear and reached inside the cavity, extending his arm all the way into the opening and pulling out whatever he could find. As he disconnected the wires inside, first the eyes stopped turning, then the eyelids stopped clapping shut, and the mouth stopped singing, and the head stopped turning. Finally, with one last jostle, the eyelids clamped shut, and the head dropped to the side lifelessly. The man stepped back, and the heavy plate of the bear's chest cavity swung shut with a clang as the animatronic bear filled with the sounds of servos and wheels, broken and disconnected, unable to move or function. Spurts of air burst from between the seams of his body, causing the air hoses misfired. The sound came to a stop, the echoes from it lingering for a moment before dying away. Then turned his attention back to a table lurched to it. Pause. The man stepped back. "That's me, I'm the purple guy." "Yes!" Good lord. Who knows, it might actually be him. The man turned his attention back to the table and lurched to it. He looked down, studying the writhing figure that lay there for a moment. The table's surface was glowing orange, and the hot metal hissed. He took a syringe from the woman's hand and thrust it into the swimming thing forcibly. He drew the plunger up, holding the needle steadily as the syringe filled with molten substance, then finally pulled away with a jolt. He staggered back toward the bear. "Now let us put you to greater purpose," he said to the glowing syringe. The man again pried open the heavy chest plate of the standing, broken bear, then carefully inserted the syringe he held directly into the chest cavity and began to press the plunger down. That is the purple guy. The cavity snapped shut, too heavy for the frail man to hold open, and he fell backwards, clutching his arm. The syringe clattered to the ground, still nearly full. The woman rushed to kneel by his side, feeling his arm for brakes. "I'm fine," he grumbled, and glanced up at the still motionless bear. "It needs to be heated more." The hissing sound continued as the figure turned on the table, pushing off plumes of steam as it rolled on the hot surface. "We can't heat it more," the woman said. "You'll destroy them." The man looked up at her with a warm smile, then jerked his eyes back to the bear. He was now looking down at them, his eyes open wide and tracking their subtlest movements. "Their lives will now have a greater purpose," the man said contentedly. "They will become more, just like you did." He looked up at the woman kneeling over him, and she looked back. Her glossy painted cheeks gleamed in the light. FNAF 2 came out. Everyone's going crazy over no doors. If only they knew that what was the care to come. Yep. John let himself into his apartment and locked the deadbolt behind him, sliding the chain into place for the first time since he moved in. I'm losing my voice. I'm going to read normally. He went to the window and fiddled with the blinds, then stopped, pushing back the impulse to close them and seal himself away completely from the outside world. On the other side of the glass, the parking lot was still silent, cast in the eerie light of a single street lamp and the blue neon sign of a nearby car dealership. There was an unfamiliar whirring sound coming from somewhere, and John watched the parking lot for a moment, not sure what he was expecting to see. The sound was gone soon after anyway. and he went into the bathroom to splash water on his face. Then he came back to his bedroom. He froze. It was the sound again, this time louder. I'm gonna be right back. I apologize for that. Someone is trying to call. Okay, time louder. It was in the room with him. John held his breath, straining to listen. It was a quiet noise, the sound of something moving, but it was too regular, too mechanical to be a mouse. He flipped on the light. The noise continued, and he slowly turned, trying to hear where it was coming from, and found himself looking at Theodore. Is that you? He asked. He stepped closer and picked up the disembodied rabbit's head. He held it to its ear, listening to the strange sound emanating from inside the stuffed creature. There was a sudden click, and the sound popped. Sound stopped. John waited, but the toy was silent. He put Theodore back down on the dresser and waited for a moment to see if the sound would begin again. Is it two heroes? Sure. Yep, it is Tube Heroes. I'm not crazy, John said to the rabbit, and I won't let you or anyone else convince me that I am. He went to his bed, reaching under the mattress with a suspicious glance at the toy rabbit. Suddenly, feeling watched, he took out the notebook he had hidden there and sat back on the bed, looking at its black and white cover. It was a plain composition notebook, the kind with a little place on the front for your name and the class subject. John had left that blank, and now he traced the empty lines with his finger, not really wanting to open the book that had sat untouched beneath his mattress for nearly 3 months now. At last he sighed and opened to the first page. I'm not crazy, he spoke to the rabbit again. I know what I saw. Charlie, he filled up the first page with nothing but facts and statistics, of which he knew embarrassingly few, he realized. Hold on, guys. Guys, I will be right back. I apologize. We're on page 42. I'll be right back. Sorry. I'm back! And with a certain thing. This video is not sponsored, but I got some Burger King. I'm upside down! I've got some Burger King chicken nuggets right here. So, I'll be right back after I get all this. Just hold on. Okay, I'm back. Yeah, the man, go ahead. I'm not going to show your message, though. But, yeah, go ahead and do a speed rating. Oh, goodness. This video is not sponsored, but I have Burger King. Burger King has some pretty good chicken nuggets. And they're really cheap, too. You can get 40 of them for $5. Which is a lot. Compared to Walmart, you have to pay $5 just for 20. You get double the amount. Okay, enough of me speaking. So I'm going to finish chapter 3 up. And after that, actually, I could just end the video right here. No, we have a few pages left. I mean, it's not long. We're at page 43, so we have about 10 pages left. 10 to 11 pages. So anyways, let's begin. And after this, I'm going to have to end the stream, so sorry. Charlie, he filled up with the first page with nothing but facts and statistics of which he knew embarrassingly few. He realized he'd known Charlie's father, but not her mother. Her brother was still a mystery. He didn't even know if she'd been born in New Harmony or if there was some other town before Fredbear's. The diner they had discovered that first time they all returned to Freddy's. He had painstakingly written out their shared history, childhood and hurricane, then the tragedy at Freddy's, then her father's suicide. She had moved in with her Aunt Jen after that. As he wrote that down, John realized that he had never known where Charlie and Jen lived. Close enough to Hurricane that she had driven rather than flown there for a dedication of Michael's memorial scholarship. Nearly 2 years ago, but it seemed odd that she had never been even mentioned the name of the town where she now and then lived. He flipped through the pages. Where am I at? They grew less and less. Sparse as he had continued, the details filling in more and more as he called them over and over to mind. He had scribbled whole scenes of memory, like the time he put gum in her hair, thinking it would be funny. Charlie had stared at him with an impish look on her face as their first grade teacher cut it out of her hair with the little blue-handled safety scissors. Charlie had managed to retrieve that lump of hairy gum from the trash when no one was looking, and took it outside with her during recess. As soon as they were out the door, Charlie grinned at John. "I want to give you your gum back," she said, and the afternoon became a game of chase. As they careened around the schoolyard, Charlie determined to shove the hair-encrusted piece of chewing gum back into John's mouth. She had not succeeded. They were caught and both given time out. John smiled as he read the scribbled version of the story. It had seemed important to start with their childhood, to ground himself in the Charlie that was, and the John that was as well. Now he sighed and flipped ahead. In the later pages, He tried to capture everything about her, the way she moved, the way she spoke. It was hard. The more time passed and the more the memories would be John's memory of Charlie and not Charlie. And so he had written down as much as he could, as fast as he could, starting 3 days after that night. There was the way she walked, self-assured until she realized someone was looking at her. There were the non sequiturs she tended to toss out every time she got nervous around people, which was often. There was the way she sometimes seemed to sink into herself, as if there were another reality going on inside her head, and she had stepped momentarily outside this one and into somewhere he could never follow. He sighed. How do you check for that? He flipped the notebook over. He had started a different set of thoughts from the back. What happened to Charlie? If the woman at Carlton's party, the woman who had appeared so suddenly at the diner, was not Charlie, then who was she? The most obvious answer, of course, would be her twin. Charlie has always referred to a boy, but Sammy could easily be short for Samantha, and the memory of Charlie had confided him of Sammy being taken from the closet was a kidnapping, not a murder. What if Charlie's twin was still alive? What if she had been what if she had not what if she had been not the only kidnapped by Stringstrap William Afton at the time, but raised by him? What if she had been shaped and molded by a psychopath for 17 years, primed with all the knowledge Springtrap could glean from Charlie's life? And now she had been sent to take Charlie's place? But why? What would be the point of that? Afton's fixation on Charlie was disturbing, but he didn't seem capable of anything so elaborate, or of caring for a human child long enough to brainwash her. He had written out a dozen other possible theories, but when he read them over now, none really felt right. They either fell apart upon scrutiny, or, like Imagine Samantha, they made no real sense. And in all cases, he could not match them to Charlie he had met earlier that night. Her sorrow and her bemusement had seemed so real. Picturing her face now raised a dull ache in his chest. John closed the book, trying to imagine for a moment the situation reversed. His Charlie, turning from him, insisting that he was not himself, that he, the real John, was dead. I'd fall apart. He would feel the way Charlie had looked tonight, pleading, hugging herself, as if it was all she could do to hold herself in one piece. He lay back on the bed, holding the book to his chest, where it sat heavier than its weight. He closed his eyes, clutching the book like a child's toy. And as he drifted to sleep, he heard the sound from Theodore's head again, the whirring, and then the click. So guys, I'm going to end it there on page 45, because it's getting really late. It's already 8 o'clock. Okay, you're back. So you just missed this, and I'm about to end the stream. I mean, I could just finish the rest of chapter 3. Ow! Coming back tomorrow for the rest. Eternal Valkyrie already knows what I'm up to. So yeah, I'm going to be reading a little bit more. So I might skip through and get to at least page chapter 8 for you guys. And tell you a small summary of what I've read. See this? I'm going to tell you a summary of this. And then tomorrow, I'm going to read the rest. The whole book. So yeah, that's what I'm going to do. Alright, see everyone. Have a pleasant evening. Stay safe out there because of COVID and all that. Hope you all enjoyed this stream. And don't forget, tomorrow's stream will be up at around the same times, 6 o'clock or 6:30. So I will see you guys there. Bye-bye.